Hello guys and gals, welcome back to Ferrigno Freedom channel. I'm Dante Ferrigno. I appreciate you being here for another carnivore reaction video. I'm here with my fellow carnivore Sam. He's taking a nap right now, so we'll let him just enjoy his restful day. And we're going to take a look at a video today by a new YouTuber, a relatively new YouTuber. He's only got 1,000 subscribers, and I really liked his thumbnail, so I thought, based on the thumbnail, here, I'll show you the thumbnail real quick. Just on the thumbnail alone, I thought, that's pretty good. That definitely focuses on where a lot of the problem started with what we as carnivores has come to realize has led so many people down the wrong path when it comes to health and nutrition, especially when it deals with meat and animal fats. So I thought, you know what? I'm going to have to give this a look. And we're going to take a closer look because, you know, one of the comments I get a lot of times when I talk about Ancel Keys is a lot of people say that I'm too lean on him, too light on him. I'm giving him a pass, basically, because I won't acknowledge that he had nefarious plans from the beginning, like he was intending to hurt people. That may be true. I just haven't personally seen direct evidence of that yet. I know he was a bully. I know he was rough on the people that he did work with. I know he was rough on his competition. And I know that he was in the pockets of the vegetable oil companies. And all of these things show to me, for the most part, somebody who made some really bad choices because he wanted personal gain. He wanted recognition. He wanted financing. He wanted to be prestigious. But maybe there's more to it than that. So I'm taking a closer look at Ancel Keys in this little video here called How One Stubborn Doctor Caused a Global and Obesity Epidemic.
Does eating fats make you fat? On the surface, it seems so. Go to any supermarket in any part of the world, and you will see rows and rows of low-fat or zero-fat alternatives of milk, yogurt, biscuits, cookies, breakfast cereal, salad dressing, cheese, the list goes on. The term low-fat has become synonymous with health. Most people believe that they got fat by eating fats. But actually, eating low-fat or zero-fat alternatives can make you gain more unhealthy weight. Ever since the low-fat food has become popular, the rate of obesity and cardiovascular diseases have increased in most countries. So let's talk about why you think low-fat food is healthy, how this lie was propagated in popular culture, and what were the effects of this misplaced belief on our health. Our story begins with a charismatic doctor, Dr. Ancel Keys. Dr. Ancel Keys was a celebrated American physiologist. He had two claims to fame in his name. First, he developed the K ration during the Second World War for American soldiers. And second, in the 1960s, he hypothesized that fats are the major cause of heart diseases, or in other words, eating fats makes you fat. Both of these inventions were later found to be much less scientific than were initially imagined. First, let's talk about the K ration. In 1941, Ancel Keys was assigned by the US War Department to design a non-perishable, ready-to-eat meal that could fit in a soldier's pocket. So Ancel Keys went to a local supermarket to choose foods that would be inexpensive but still be enough to provide energy. And just like that, he concocted the K ration. In total, one K ration contained 3,200 kilocalories. He then tested these K ration meals on 6 soldiers. Because of the short duration and hasty nature of testing of these K rations, Ancel Keys did not realize the simple fact that soldiers fighting, digging, and marching in the real war conditions would require many more calories per day. And then he also included 4 cigarettes with each K ration. I can only imagine how many soldiers got tobacco addiction and hence lifelong bad health conditions because of those 4 Chesterfields every day. But then we can't blame Dr. Ancel Keys entirely for the cigarettes because in those days even well-trained doctors recommended cigarettes to the general public. But his second invention proved to be much more dangerous than the K ration and its cigarettes. He had hypothesized that saturated fats are making people more prone to cardiovascular diseases such as heart attacks, etc. Now, in the scientific process, proposing a hypothesis is not bad at all. Actually, proposing a hypothesis is the first step in any scientific discovery. So there's nothing wrong with him proposing this idea. But his approach in trying to prove his hypothesis to be correct was a bit too unscientific.
Yeah.
In post-war America, Ancel Keys was perplexed by a seemingly counterintuitive observation. American business executives, presumably among the best-fed people, had high rates of heart disease, while in post-war Europe, still grappling with reduced food supplies, heart disease...
I'm sorry, I had to pause that for just a second. I'll go back to the beginning of this section. When I saw them throw Kevin up there from The Office, I thought about a commercial that I would like to talk about that I see every once in a while when I watch football lately, where it's got the guy that played Stanley and the lady that played, I believe it was Phyllis on The Office, sitting together eating cereal. I think it's Cheerios or something like that. But they're talking about a healthy lifestyle. And I thought to myself, of all the people I would take any health or eating advice from on the Office television show, those are two of the ones that I would never listen to. Kevin would definitely have been the third one. Not that I don't love them as characters, but they're definitely in that lifestyle that I was in 3 years ago before I started Lion Diet, and I had all of the problems that I had. And I was buying that same garbage that they're talking about that's supposed to make them healthier, but they don't look any healthier if that's what they've been eating. You know, they're getting a notion that their cholesterol is better because they're eating something that says heart healthy, better for cholesterol, or whatever it says. Well, I think based on the way this guy's presenting this information so far, we're going to touch on that same concept of how trying to focus on cholesterol actually turns out to be so difficult that the doctor, not Dr. Keys, but the doctor that directly worked with Eisenhower, actually lied to Eisenhower about his cholesterol numbers because it would upset him so much to hear how bad his cholesterol was, even though he was eating all the things that Dr. Keys recommended, the vegetable oils. He was like having a certain amount of vegetable oil every day, like that was supposed to help something. Ultimately, it was hurting him. It's just so funny. People track this cholesterol like it means something so important. And when doctors look at a lot of numbers of carnivores, they're flabbergasted by their LDL numbers. Now, I haven't had ridiculously high LDL numbers for some reason. I don't know exactly why my LDL has been hovering between 90 and 110 on the times I've seen it. But my triglycerides are in the 20s and my HDL is in the 80s. So doctors look at that and they look at my overall metabolic health based on my waist to body size, and they're just blown away. They just think this is amazing. You have the results that most people would look for in an athlete. I do like to go on my rabbit trails, so let me get back to what this gentleman's saying here about cherry picking data.
In post-war America, Ancel Keys was perplexed by a seemingly counterintuitive observation. American business executives, presumably among the best-fed people, had high rates of heart disease, while in post-war Europe, still grappling with reduced food supplies, heart disease rates had plummeted sharply. And then suddenly, on September 23, 1955, the then US President Eisenhower suffered the first of a series of heart attacks. This event brought America's attention to the heart disease pandemic, and Ancel Keys proposed a hypothesis ready for a nation grappling with the cardiovascular disease pandemic. In November of the same year, at an expert meeting at the World Health Organization in Geneva, Ancel Keys proposed his hypothesis that fats contain cholesterol and cholesterol causes heart disease. He didn't have any research-based, verified proof of this hypothesis, and as part of his argument to prove his hypothesis correct, he presented a correlation between deaths from heart disease and percentage of fat in diet in 6 countries. Now, if you look at the data of the 6 countries that he presented, it does look like a diet rich in fats is responsible for the cardiovascular disease pandemic. But in reality, Dr. Keys had cherry-picked these 6 countries out of a total cohort of 22 countries. He concealed the data from the other 16 countries. But why would he do that? If you look at the data of all 22 countries, you can see no correlation between heart disease and saturated fat consumption. For example, people from France and Netherlands have a high saturated fat consumption and very little incidence of heart disease. But on the other hand, people from Finland and Australia have a high saturated fat consumption and a very high incidence of heart disease. So it's crystal clear that there's no correlation between heart disease and saturated fat consumption. This cherry picking of just 18% of the total data shows an extreme lack of intellectual honesty and research integrity on Ancel Keys' part. But luck was on the side of Ancel Keys. How? Well, after Eisenhower's heart attacks, Dr. Paul Dudley White was appointed a personal physician of the president. Now, Dr. White happened to be a good friend of Ancel Keys.
Oh, I didn't know that part. I did know about Dr. White and what went on with his work with Eisenhower because of one of the books I've read recently. I can't remember which book it was. I'm always reading, it seems like. I think I finished 24 books last year. Maybe it was 26. I don't know. But anyway, yeah, I had known about this doctor. And the other thing I wanted to point out was how well he broke down how those charts didn't show what Ancel Keys was trying to show when you added in all the information. A lot of people looking at that might not understand why having dots above and below the line that he was trying to follow would make such a difference, but that is one of the best representations I have seen that explains it to the layman of how this information was doctored. Well done.
Both enjoyed vacations in southern Italy. This friendship with Dr. White gave Ancel Keys the access to financial support from many US government agencies to prove his hypothesis. With Dr. White's approval, Keys placed Eisenhower on his experimental, heart-friendly, low-fat, prudent diet. The outcomes were not good. Eisenhower developed type 2 diabetes, suffered a stroke, had multiple heart attacks, and died from intractable heart failure. Keys' heart-healthy diet contributed significantly to the death of President Eisenhower, but this connection was never made public. Anyways, in 1957, Ancel Keys tried to convince the American Heart Association to adopt his fats cause heart attacks hypothesis, but AHA didn't agree with him and maintained that experimental studies needed to be done in order to find if Keys' hypothesis was correct or wrong. In 1958, he got a massive, unheard of $2 million government funding. Then in 1961, the American Heart Association suddenly recommended reducing saturated fat and cholesterol intake from foods such as butter, egg yolks, and full-fat milk, and replacing them with low-fat alternatives and seed oils. Now, why did AHA have this sudden change of heart from its 1957 stance? The simple reason was that during these 4 years, Ancel Keys was added to the board of AHA, and given his growing clout, he dominated the Dietary Guidelines Committee of AHA, where he ignored the voice of alternative theories which suspected sugars and refined carbohydrates for the increasing rate of heart diseases in America.
I would say that's your typical office politics or your whatever politics. It's politics. That's what it came down to. It wasn't, does the science actually match what he's saying? It's, oh, this guy's important now and he's on our board. This means money for the AHA. This means recognition. This means a lot of things. So we're going to listen to this guy now. That's what I took from that.
Theories which suspected sugars and refined carbohydrates for the increasing rate of heart diseases in America. On 13th January 1961, he was featured on the cover of Time magazine. That was a big deal. Now, Ancel Keys and his hypothesis became so popular that the alternative theories, such as eating sugars makes you fat, was ignored by the press and, more importantly, by the funding agencies. The public accepted Ancel Keys' hypothesis as the final truth. From 1968 to 1973, Keys and Ivan Franz initiated a large randomized controlled trial where saturated fats were replaced by unsaturated oils in people's diets. But the results were never published in the press. Why? The results of this study proved Ancel Keys' hypothesis wrong. The trial had concluded that although replacement of saturated fats with unsaturated oils effectively lowers the cholesterol in the blood, but this lowering of the blood cholesterol does not lower the risk of death from coronary heart disease. So, long story short, Ancel Keys did his best to convince the general public as well as the government agencies that it was saturated fats that made people fat, despite finding that it's simply not true. At the same time, he actively suppressed any alternative.
See, that's where I get down to the fact that I can understand why people think that this was nefarious intent. He didn't mind killing people. But at the same time, I can also see that human nature, especially somebody who's as headstrong as he was, that wanted that recognition, that needed that power position that he was in, that needed his career to be boosted by what he was saying, that needed his hypothesis to be right. I can see that side of it as well. But when you've got evidence that says what you're doing is leading to more deaths, I can understand exactly why people would think that that's nefarious intent. I still haven't seen enough to convince me that he is part of some kind of cabal that a lot of people will point out that we currently have, I think, a bit of going on in the world right now with a lot of the elites that would just sooner see the planet rid of a lot of people that don't include them. But I don't know for a fact that it goes back this far, although I wouldn't doubt it. One thing I have seen as a student of history over my lifetime of studying is that I am constantly surprised at how bad people can be because they want to get their own. They want to get something, they want power, money, prestige, sex, recognition, whatever it is. And even when I look back on my own life, I'm kind of stupefied at the decisions I've made for those same purposes in some cases. Not nearly on the same scale, but enough to realize that human nature can lead us to making some pretty bad decisions. And I hate to think that our governments and that all the things we've been told for so many years about nutrition are wrong, but ultimately, I'm living proof of it right now. When you look at me the way I was before and the way I felt and the way I needed doctors and the way I needed medicine and the way I couldn't think clearly and the way I had so much pain, just goes on. And now all of that stuff is gone because I'm doing the exact opposite of what all these experts used to say. Don't eat red meat. I eat red meat almost 100% exclusively. I do occasionally have some things that are not on my red meat diet, but that's usually for experimental purposes or bad decision. And in either case, I've found them both ways to be bad decisions. But I decided I was going to do those things. I was going to do those experiments for you guys as I'm going down this journey. And because, yes, I would love to add a few things back to my menu so I could have a few other things to choose from. But when it comes right down to it, my body responds best when I only eat the meat and fat that makes my body healthy and happy. So if that means eating hamburgers and ribeyes as often as I can, I'm going to stick with it. And that's why I keep doing this channel. That's why I keep coming back and talking to you guys, is that I know that there is so much propaganda out there about health that is against red meat. And whether you think it's the evil intentions of those who want to play Masters of the Universe on the elite side right now, or whether or not it's just simple human nature leading us in the wrong direction step after step after step until we're way off course, whichever the case may be, this should help you understand how you got all that wrong thinking in your head about nutrition. And you should be able to see some of the other examples out there of carnivores like me who have changed their lives for the better, despite their cholesterol numbers, despite the fact that doctors said that they weren't going to be able to heal this or heal that, people getting their vision back, people getting numb spots back, people getting rid of rheumatoid arthritis, gut issues, autoimmune issues, even fighting cancer and other issues that have been involved in their lives by going to a carnivore way of eating. All the things we were told the opposite about for at least 50 years, if not longer.
Any alternative hypotheses, but despite all the clout and charisma of Ansel Keys, a British physiologist, Dr. John Yudkin, tried to bring our attention to a mounting body of evidence that suggested that it just might be the sugars and not the fats that's making us fat. Around the end of the Second World War, in the UK, Dr. John Yudkin was also trying to understand why people were suddenly getting obese and dying from heart disease in affluent countries. And given the dramatic increase in sugar consumption during the first half of the century, Yudkin started to suspect that excessive sugar in the diet might be the real culprit. Studying historical data, he found that increasing prosperity always leads to an increase in sugar consumption, particularly in manufactured foods. What happens is people leave their traditional food habits and instead start consuming more of the readily available factory-made food, which is usually very rich in their sugar content. Food companies were adding a lot of sugar in their factory-manufactured food items. Why? Sugar made from heavily subsidized corn was much cheaper than other ingredients for the food companies. It added more weight to the final product and drove up profit margins for food manufacturers. In 1964, Yudkin noted that in the wealthier countries, there is evidence that sugar and sugar-containing foods contribute to several diseases, including obesity, dental caries, diabetes, and heart attacks. He and his associates found that patients with plaque in their arteries consumed significantly more sugar than the control group. In another experiment, Yudkin fed both experimental animals and human volunteers with different quantities of sugar. As a result, Yudkin suggested that the excessive consumption of sugar might result in a disturbance in the secretion of insulin, and that this in turn might contribute to plaque in the arteries as well as diabetes. In 1972, Yudkin wrote the book titled Pure, White and Deadly. He wanted to make the general public aware of the evidence that consumption of sugar was leading to a greatly increased incidence of blockage of arteries, obesity, diabetes, and liver disease.
100%.
Yudkin explained in the beginning of the book, "I hope that when you have read this book, I shall have convinced you that sugar is really dangerous." The message was extremely unwelcome to the sugar industry, and these firms employed a number of methods to impede Yudkin's work. The final chapter of Pure, White and Deadly lists several examples of attempts to interfere with the funding of his research and to prevent its publication. It also refers to the bitter language and personal smears on Yudkin by Ancel Keys. So, how exactly did the sugar industry try to impede Yudkin's discovery? In 2016, researchers discovered that the sugar industry paid scientists in the 1960s to play down the link between sugar and heart disease and promote saturated fat as the culprit instead. The documents show that in 1964, John Hickson, a top sugar industry executive, discussed a plan with others in the industry to shift public opinion about the mounting evidence of relationship between high sugar diets and the country's high rate of heart disease. So, a trade group called the Sugar Research Foundation, today known as the Sugar Association, paid 3 Harvard scientists about $60,000 in today's money to publish a review of research on sugar, fat, and heart disease. The studies used in the review were handpicked by the sugar group. The Harvard scientists were asked to underplay the link between sugar and heart disease and instead exaggerate Ancel Keys' hypothesized role of saturated fat in heart disease. The 3 scientists did exactly that. As they worked on their review, the Harvard researchers shared and discussed early drafts with Mr. Hickson, who responded that he was pleased with what they were writing. The article was published in the prestigious New England Journal of Medicine.
I've never heard any of this directly. This is good. This is really good work on his research side here to find out who did what, who was paid what, who was paid to say what. I would like to know what the letter said. Let me back that up for a second. I want to hear that part again. Sugar paid science.
In 2016, researchers discovered that the sugar industry paid scientists in the 1960s to play down the link between sugar and heart disease and promote saturated fat as the culprit instead. The documents show that in 1964, John Hickson, a top sugar industry executive, discussed a plan with others in the industry to shift public opinion about the mounting evidence of relationship between high sugar diets and the country's high rate of heart disease. So, a trade group called the Sugar Research Foundation, today known as the Sugar Association, paid 3 Harvard scientists about $60,000 in today's money to publish a review of research on sugar, fat, and heart disease. The studies used in the review were handpicked by the sugar group. The Harvard scientists were asked to underplay the link between sugar and heart disease and instead exaggerate Ancel Keys' hypothesized role of saturated fat in heart disease. The three scientists did exactly that. As they worked on their review, the Harvard researchers shared and discussed early drafts with Mr. Hickson, who responded that he was pleased with what they were writing. The article was published in the prestigious New England Journal of Medicine in 1967. In the final draft of the article, the three Harvard scientists had dismissed the data on sugar being behind the heart diseases as weak and had given far more credence to the data implicating saturated fats for the heart disease epidemic. After the review was published, the debate about sugar connected with heart disease died down.
Well, that even though it doesn't show the direct wording of what was said to get them to do this, just to realize that they were ignoring the current science that was pointing out that sugar was the problem and not saturated fats, and the fact that they were looking for that money and that publication of those documents that was going to be funded by the Sugar Association shows a conflict of interest that certainly shows up over and over and over throughout people that do nutrition research, because they want to get funding for their projects too. And pretty much anybody who doesn't fall within this line, whoever it was that came up with this, whether it was the leader of the Sugar Association or if it was somebody in a government position, I haven't quite kind of put that together as to how this became the point that the government would want to see. If it was whoever was doing government funding for these things seemed to only want to fund it if it focused on Ancel Keys' hypothesis as being the right one.
To discredit the case against sugar was largely successful. That's the problem with industry-funded research, isn't it? Anyways, the net result of all this was that the market saw an increased demand for low-fat or zero-fat alternatives of milk and other dairy products.
That stuff was
even
awful.
After the low-fat diet became the norm, obesity rates kept on rising.
Yeah.
Why was that the case? Because food tastes bad when you remove natural fat from it. So to make it tasty again, food companies add sugar to it. Remember, sugar is very cheap, thanks to the massive corn subsidies that still exist. As a result, the consumption of sugars has skyrocketed to about 126.4 grams daily per person in the US. That's more than 10 times the recommended 11 grams per day. Today, scientists know very well that cholesterol is not the demon that Ancel Keys tried to portray it was. And we know that the main culprit is the excessive sugar we eat, and it is highly addictive. Once you get used to high amount of sugar in your diet, it's not easy to get rid of it. So, what's the takeaway from all this? In one sentence, sugar is bad for your teeth, heart, and liver. Overconsumption of sugars leads to increased chances of diabetes, chronic body inflammation, and heart attack. Most stored fat in your body is formed.
Also, Alzheimer's disease. Did you know that Alzheimer's disease is now being currently referred to as diabetes type 3 in a lot of doctor circles where they talk about these type of illnesses, these chronic diseases? It's been found to be so related to diabetes that it is now a version of diabetes.
Heart and liver. Overconsumption of sugars leads to increased chances of diabetes, chronic body inflammation, and heart attack. Most stored fat in your body is formed not from the naturally occurring fats that you eat in foods, but when the liver converts the excess unneeded sugars into glycogen and stores it as fat. So basically, the fat that you see deposited on your body is nothing but excess sugar. Now, of course, we know that trans fats are bad for our health. And so I'm sure you do look at trans fat content on the food labels. But if you want to be healthier, the more important thing is to be more cautious, much more cautious about the amount of sugars and refined carbohydrates present in the foods. So next time you check the nutritional information on a pack of food or beverage, don't forget to count sugar content, because most probably it's that sugar that's going to go inside of your body and convert into fat. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Until then, bye-bye.
Excellent job. Excellent presentation, especially with relation to the sugar issue. Gosh, that's a great one you can share with your friends who don't understand what happened with the whole situation with how we got so far off track on nutrition. And being that this guy has a relatively small channel with 1.37 thousand subscribers, that's 1,370 roughly subscribers, Free Science 365. I encourage you guys to go by there and take a look at his video there and give him a like. Maybe even subscribe, give him a boost for revealing some true information. He has a great presentation style, and I certainly would want to see more of his work. That's it for this one, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any thoughts on what else needs to be talked about in a video like that, the thing that comes to mind for me is seed oils that he didn't really touch on. But there's no doubt that sugar is the thing that we have in such mass quantities, more than we ever did before. But seed oils also, people don't even realize how they permeate their lives until they start to read the ingredients on the stuff they're eating all the time. Something I never used to do, but now I do it religiously. And all I do is look at the ingredients on most of the stuff my wife will pick up or my kids will pick up that they want to get from the store. And I'll think to myself, I would never want to put this in my body now that I know what this stuff does to me. That's it for this one, guys. I'll see you next time.
If we pay extra, could we maybe get some grease or fat?
One of the things I do to fight back against big food and big pharma is to recommend companies that make animal-based products that are good for our bodies and good for our skin. In this case, I'm talking about Vintage Tradition. Vintage Tradition tallow balms are a go-to for me now, especially the unscented one. I like it because it doesn't have anything extra in it other than extra virgin olive oil and tallow rendered from suet. This is the interior fat, also called suet or kidney fat. For the tallow they use making the tallow balm. Highly saturated and therefore more therapeutic than any other. They don't use any trim fat or any other fats besides suet. So if you want some ancestrally appropriate skincare products that are going to help support the carnivore movement, head over to vintagetradition.com and use my discount code Dante, D-A-N-T-E, to save 10% on your order. I promise you won't regret it. Their products are fantastic. I love them and I use them all the time.